It was a cold morning when the black car stopped outside the old orphanage. The children pressed their faces against the window, trying to see who it was. Visitors rarely came there, and when they did, it usually meant donations or inspections. A tall man stepped out, dressed neatly in a dark suit. He looked important, the kind of person who lived in a world far away from theirs. His driver opened the backseat door and the man took out a few large boxes filled with toys and clothes. The head caretaker rushed to greet him, smiling widely. "Thank you for your generosity, sir." "The children will be so happy," the man smiled politely. "It's nothing." "Just a small gesture," he said, handing her an envelope with a donation. His name was Mr. Lawson, a successful CEO of a tech company. Despite his wealth, he had a calm and gentle way of speaking. As the children gathered in the hall, the caretaker called out, "Kids, this kind man came to visit us today. Let's thank him properly." The children clapped and cheered. Some ran toward the boxes to peek at the toys inside. Mr. Lawson watched with mild amusement. He had seen much sadness in the world, but this place hit him differently. There was something pure and fragile about these children, something that made him think about his own life. He had money, houses, cars. Yet lately he'd been feeling a strange emptiness. As he looked around, his eyes fell on a small figure sitting alone near the corner of the room. A little girl, maybe 9 or 10, with short brown hair and thin arms. She wasn't playing or laughing with the others. She sat beside an old piano with missing keys, gently running her fingers over them without pressing down. "Who's that?" he asked softly. The caretaker followed his gaze. "Oh, that's Lily," she said. "She doesn't talk much, but she loves that piano. It hasn't worked in years, yet she sits there every day pretending to play." Mr. Lawson tilted his head. "Does she know how?" The caretaker smiled sadly. "Not really. She just listens to old music tapes sometimes and tries to copy the sound." He nodded thoughtfully. Then almost playfully he said, "If she plays that piano, I'll adopt her." The caretaker laughed nervously. "Oh, you're joking, sir. That piano doesn't even work properly," but he smiled. "I know. Let's see what happens." Some of the staff nearby overheard and chuckled softly. One of the boys even called out, "Hey, Lily, the man said he'll adopt you if you play the piano." Everyone laughed except the little girl. She froze for a moment, then looked up slowly. Her big brown eyes met Mr. Lawson's. He hadn't expected her to take it seriously, but there was something in her gaze. Quiet, strong, and determined. Without saying a word, she stood and sat down properly at the piano. The laughter faded. Everyone turned to watch. She pressed one key. It made a dull sound, out of tune, almost painful to hear. Still, she didn't stop. She closed her eyes and began pressing more keys, softly, carefully, as if searching for a melody that only she could hear. At first, it sounded like noise, broken notes on a broken instrument. But then, little by little, something beautiful began to form. The rhythm became steady, gentle, and oddly emotional. The hall fell silent. Mr. Lawson stood still, his smile fading into quiet surprise. She kept playing, her fingers moving with patience and care. Even though the piano was old and half dead, the way she touched it made it come alive again. When she finally stopped, no one clapped or laughed. Everyone just stared at her. She looked up, uncertain, as if she'd done something wrong. Mr. Lawson cleared his throat. "That was amazing," he said softly. The caretaker stepped closer and whispered, "She's been doing that for months. Every morning before breakfast, every night before bed. We tried to stop her once because the piano's so noisy, but she cried so hard we let her be." Mr. Lawson crouched down a little, meeting the girl's eyes. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated, then spoke in a small voice. "My mom used to play. I remember the sound." The room grew quiet again. "Your mother played?" he asked gently. She nodded. Before she went away." He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Her eyes said the rest. That night, after he returned home, Mr. Lawson couldn't stop thinking about her. He had met thousands of people, signed hundreds of deals, but that small girl with the broken piano stayed in his mind. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat near his grand piano in the living room. It was perfectly tuned, shiny, and beautiful, but somehow it sounded empty when he pressed the keys. He thought about the way she played, not perfectly, not even correctly, but with heart. She had played as if she was trying to speak through sound, as if music was the only language she trusted. The next day he called the orphanage. "I'd like to visit again," he said simply. When he arrived, the children ran to greet him again. Lily was at her usual spot by the piano, quietly waiting. When she saw him, she smiled a little. He walked over and placed a small box in front of her. Inside was a small portable keyboard. "I thought maybe you could use this," he said. Her eyes widened. "For me?" He nodded. "Yes, but there's one condition," he added with a soft grin. "You have to promise to keep playing." She smiled shyly and nodded. "I promise." He spent the rest of the day watching her try the keyboard. Her tiny hands moved slowly, pressing each key with care. She played random notes at first, then began forming small melodies. The sound filled the room, bright and full of life. One of the other kids whispered, "She's really good." Mr. Lawson smiled quietly. "Yes, she is." Over the next few weeks, he visited the orphanage more often. Each time, he brought something small, a new piece of music, a better stand, or extra batteries for the keyboard. But mostly, he came just to listen. He learned more about Lily from the caretakers. Her parents had been street musicians who performed near the subway stations. They didn't have much, but they loved her dearly. One winter night, they were caught in an accident while walking home. She was found alone holding her mother's scarf and was brought to the orphanage. She didn't speak for almost a year after that. The only thing that comforted her was the sound of a piano. When Mr. Lawson heard this, he felt his chest tighten. He had lost his own parents young too, though he'd been luckier, raised by relatives who had money. Still, he understood the feeling of being small in a world that didn't care. One evening, when he came to visit again, he found her sitting quietly by the piano, crying. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. She wiped her eyes quickly, shaking her head. "The other kids said I'm weird, that no one will ever want me because I'm quiet and broken." He knelt down beside her. "They're wrong," he said firmly. "You're not broken. You're brave." She looked at him, surprised. He smiled softly. "Do you know what I think? I think the people who feel the most pain often make the most beautiful music. And you make the kind of music that can heal hearts." Her tears slowed. For the first time, she believed him. Before leaving that night, he looked back once more. She was already at the piano again, fingers gently pressing the keys, lost in her own world. He stood there for a while, listening. Something in him began to change, something he hadn't felt in years. That night, he called his lawyer. "I need you to start the adoption inquiry," he said. The lawyer sounded confused. "You mean the girl from the orphanage? The one you mentioned before?" "Yes," he said simply. "Her name is Lily." When he hung up, he sat down by his grand piano again. For the first time in years, he tried playing. Not the polished way he used to, but the way she did. Raw and real. And in those uneven notes, he realized something. He wasn't just helping her. She was helping him too, reminding him that love doesn't come from perfection, it comes from connection. The next time he visited the orphanage, he didn't bring gifts. He just sat beside her as she played. After a while, she looked up and asked softly, "Are you going to come again?" He smiled warmly. "Yes, I'll come again. As many times as you want." She nodded and began playing once more. The music filled the empty room, imperfect, uneven, but full of heart. And as he listened, he whispered to himself, "If she plays the piano, I'll adopt her." But now, it wasn't a joke. It was a promise. Days turned into weeks, and Mr. Lawson kept visiting the orphanage. Every time he came, Lily would light up, though she tried to hide it behind her shy smile. The other children had started teasing her less, mostly because now everyone wanted to hear her play. Even the caretakers began scheduling little music hours so she could perform for the younger kids. One Sunday morning, when the sun poured softly through the orphanage windows, she sat by her small keyboard again. The sound was brighter now, clearer, and her playing had improved so much that even the staff found themselves stopping to listen. Mr. Lawson walked in quietly, holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. He handed one to her. "Careful, it's hot," he said with a kind smile. She took it gently, whispering, "Thank you." He sat beside her on the bench. "Do you remember the song you played last week?" She nodded. "I made it up." He looked at her in surprise. "You wrote it yourself?" She nodded again. "It's about my mom and dad. When I play it, I feel like they're here again." For a long moment, he didn't speak. The small girl beside him had lost almost everything, yet still found a way to turn her pain into music. He thought about how most adults, even with all their strength and money, couldn't do that. "Can you play it for me again?" he asked softly. She started playing. The melody was slow and gentle, almost like a lullaby. Every note felt like a whisper of memory, the sound of someone remembering love, loss, and hope all at once. When she finished, she turned to him. "Did you like it?" He nodded. "It's the most beautiful song I've heard in a long time." Her eyes shone, and for the first time he saw her smile fully, a real, warm smile that made his heart ache a little. That same week, he began working on the adoption papers more seriously. It wasn't simple. The process required background checks, home visits, and a lot of waiting. But every night he told himself it's worth it. One evening his assistant asked curiously, "Sir, why this girl? You've donated to many places before, but you never got this involved." He smiled quietly. "Because she reminds me of something I lost a long time ago." He didn't explain further. He remembered his own childhood, growing up in a strict family where music and dreams didn't matter. His father had believed only in success and work. Maybe that's why, even after earning everything, he still felt something missing. Lily's music had reached a place in him that nothing else had. A few weeks later, he brought a music teacher to the orphanage, a kind, elderly woman who had once trained children for national competitions. "This is Mrs. Parker," he said. "She's going to help you learn properly." Lily's eyes widened. "For me," he nodded. "Only if you want to," she smiled softly. "I want to." From that day, her lessons began. Mrs. Parker was gentle but firm. She taught Lily how to read notes, how to sit straight, how to feel the rhythm instead of rushing through. And Lily, she learned fast. It was like she'd been waiting for this moment all her life. Sometimes, after her lessons, she'd look at Mr. Lawson and say, "Did I do okay today?" And he'd always answer, "You did better than okay. You did amazing." He never missed a session. No matter how busy his schedule was, he always made time to be there. His employees at work noticed the change too. The man who used to be serious and quiet now smiled more often, laughed even. "She's good for you," his driver said one day as they drove back from the orphanage. He chuckled softly. "Maybe I needed her more than she needs me." One evening, while walking Lily back to her dorm room, he saw a small drawing taped to her wall. It was a picture of a man and a little girl sitting by a piano. He asked, "Did you draw this?" She blushed and nodded. "That's you and me. You're listening while I play." He stared at the drawing for a moment, feeling his throat tighten. "That's beautiful, Lily." She hesitated, then said quietly, "Do you think I'll ever get to play on a big stage someday?" He smiled. "I don't think you will. I know you will." The adoption process moved forward, though not as fast as he hoped. The orphanage and child welfare office needed time for background checks. But everyone there already saw the bond between them. Even the caretaker once whispered, "I've never seen her so happy. It's like she's come back to life." Spring arrived, and with it came the orphanage's annual charity event, a small gathering to raise funds. The caretaker asked if Lily could perform. She hesitated at first. "What if I mess up?" Mr. Lawson knelt beside her. "Then you try again. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about telling your story." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Then I'll tell mine." The evening of the event was magical. The hall was decorated with paper lanterns and flowers made by the children. Guests in fine clothes filled the seats, chatting and laughing. Mr. Lawson sat in the front row, his heart racing like a nervous parent's. When Lily walked onto the small stage, the room quieted. She looked so small in her white dress, her hands trembling slightly as she sat at the piano. The caretaker announced softly, "Our Lily will perform a piece she wrote herself." Lily looked up once. Her eyes found Mr. Lawson's in the crowd. He smiled and nodded, a silent promise that he was there. Then she began to play. The first note echoed through the room, soft and trembling, but soon her hands grew steadier. The melody was warm and filled with emotion. It wasn't perfect, but it touched everyone. Her music spoke of loneliness, of love, of hope, of everything she couldn't put into words. By the time she finished, the hall was silent. And then slowly applause broke out. Loud, heartfelt, endless applause. Tears welled up in her eyes. She looked at Mr. Lawson, and he was already standing, clapping with everyone else. Later that night, after everyone left, he found her sitting by the stage, hugging her small keyboard. You did it, he said softly. She smiled shyly. I didn't think they'd like it, he chuckled. They didn't just like it. They loved it. And so did I. She looked at him quietly. Do you really mean it? About adopting me? He knelt down. Yes, I do. I'm just waiting for the final approval. But no matter what, you already have a family in me. She didn't say anything. She just hugged him, tightly, suddenly, as if afraid he might disappear. He held her back gently. I promise I'm not going anywhere. When he returned home that night, he sat at his piano again. This time he tried to play her song from memory. The notes were off, but the feeling was right. He smiled to himself. The next morning, his assistant handed him a letter. From the adoption office, she said. He opened it with trembling hands. It was the confirmation. The adoption had been approved. He couldn't stop smiling. He called the orphanage immediately. Tell Lily I have good news, he said. When he arrived that afternoon, she was outside playing with the other kids. The moment she saw him, she ran over. You came back. He crouched down, always. And today I came to take you home. Her eyes widened. Home? He nodded. Yes, Lily, you're home. For a moment, she just stood there stunned. Then she burst into tears, but they were happy tears. The caretaker came out, also emotional, holding the papers. Congratulations to both of you, she said warmly. Lily hugged everyone goodbye, clutching her small keyboard close to her chest. Then she walked to the car, her little heart full of dreams. As they drove away, she looked out the window, waving until the orphanage disappeared from view. Mr. Lawson looked at her and said, You know, the first time I saw you, I made a joke. I said I'd adopt you if you played the piano. She smiled, wiping her tears. And I did, he nodded. Yes, you did. But what you didn't know was that your music played something inside me, too. She tilted her head. What do you mean? He smiled softly. You reminded me what love sounds like. She rested her head against the seat, still smiling, and whispered, Then I'll keep playing. So you never forget? The car drove on, sunlight pouring through the window, painting their faces in gold. Inside that quiet moment, a man who once had everything but felt empty finally found what he'd been missing. Family. And a little girl who once had nothing found a place to belong. The first few days in her new home felt like a dream to Lily. Everything looked so different from the orphanage. The wide hallways, the warm light, the quiet rooms that smelled faintly of fresh flowers. She had never seen such a big house before. There was a grand staircase, shiny floors and walls decorated with paintings. But what caught her attention most was the piano in the living room. It wasn't broken or old. It was beautiful, polished, and perfect. She walked up to it slowly, touching the smooth surface as if it were something sacred. Mr. Lawson watched her from the doorway, smiling softly. It's yours now, too, he said. She turned to him, her eyes wide. Really? He nodded. Yes, you can play it whenever you want. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down carefully. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and she pressed one, then another. The sound that came out was pure and rich. Her eyes lit up. He walked closer. Go on, he said gently. Play. She began slowly, unsure at first, but soon her hands moved more freely. The notes filled the room, soft and beautiful, echoing through the house. He sat down on the couch, listening quietly. It was strange how peaceful everything felt. That small sound of music, mixed with the faint ticking of the clock, made the big house feel like home for the first time in years. When she finished, she turned to him, smiling shyly. Did you like it? He chuckled softly. I loved it. You make this house come alive. Every morning after that, he'd wake up to the sound of her playing, sometimes cheerful, sometimes quiet, but always full of emotion. The maids would pause in their work just to listen. Even the driver once said, Sir, that child's music feels like sunshine. Lily's world was changing fast, but deep inside she was still a little nervous. Everything was new. New clothes, new school, new people. She wasn't used to attention or kindness. Sometimes when Mr. Lawson left for work, she'd sit by the window and watch the gates until his car disappeared, afraid that maybe he wouldn't come back. But he always did. No matter how late he returned, he made sure to check on her, ask about her day, and listen to at least one song before dinner. One evening, as she was practicing, he sat beside her with a cup of tea. You know, he said, I used to play a little when I was younger, but I stopped. She looked at him curiously. Why? He smiled faintly. I guess life got busy. I thought there were more important things. Like work? She asked. He nodded. Yes, I spent so many years chasing success that I forgot how to feel. You reminded me. She tilted her head, not fully understanding but smiling anyway. Then we can play together. You and me, he laughed. You might regret saying that. I'm terrible now. We can fix that, she said with a grin. And they did. Every weekend they played duets together. Simple songs at first, then more difficult ones. She'd correct his rhythm and he'd tease her about being the strict teacher. The house that was once silent now carried laughter and music, but life wasn't all easy. School was hard for Lily. She was shy and quiet, and some kids didn't understand her. They whispered behind her back, calling her the CEO's charity girl. Sometimes, she came home quiet, pretending everything was fine. One afternoon, Mr. Lawson found her sitting by the piano, not playing, just staring at the keys. He sat down beside her. Rough day? She nodded slowly. They said I don't belong there, that I'm only there because of you. He sighed softly. Kids can be cruel sometimes. Her voice was small. Maybe they're right. I don't belong anywhere, he turned to her gently. Listen to me. You belong exactly where your heart feels at peace. And for me, that's right here with you. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she smiled through them. I'll keep playing then. It makes me feel at peace, he nodded. Good, then play. Always play. That night she played her softest melody yet, one that made him stop working and just listen. Every note seemed to say thank you. As months passed, their bond grew stronger. He started taking her to his office sometimes on weekends. She'd sit quietly in a corner, drawing or listening to music while he worked. The employees adored her. Once during a company event, there was a piano on stage. Some of the staff encouraged her to play, but she hesitated. She wasn't sure if she could perform in front of so many strangers. Mr. Lawson leaned down and whispered, Remember the first day we met? You were brave then. You can be brave now. She took a deep breath and walked up to the piano. The room fell silent. When she started to play, her hands didn't shake this time. Her music carried calmness and confidence, something even the adults couldn't explain. When she finished, the whole hall clapped loudly. Mr. Lawson stood up proudly. That's my daughter, he said with a smile. The words made her eyes fill with tears again. She had waited years to hear someone call her that. After the event, he said quietly, You were wonderful up there. She grinned. I wasn't as nervous as before. It felt like the piano was talking for me. He nodded. That's because it's your voice now. You speak through music. But while her new life brought joy, it also brought a new kind of pressure. Mr. Lawson's business began facing challenges. There were late meetings, stressful calls, and days when he came home looking tired. Lily noticed it but didn't say anything. Instead, she started leaving little notes on his desk. Don't forget to smile or you can do it. Sometimes she'd even leave a small drawing of them playing piano together. He kept every single one. One night, when he came home late, he found her asleep on the couch with a blanket and her music sheets scattered around. He picked up one of the pages and saw the title written in her handwriting, Home. He sat down quietly and looked at her. For the first time in a long while, he realized how much she'd changed his life. She had filled every quiet space with warmth. The next morning, he told her, You know that song you're writing, and I think you should finish it. She smiled sleepily. Maybe I will. It's my favorite one. Weeks later, her teacher told her about a local music competition for young musicians. The first prize included a scholarship to a famous academy. When she came home and told him, he looked both proud and nervous. That's amazing, he said. But are you sure you're ready? She nodded confidently. I want to try. Not for the prize, for you. Because you believed in me first. He felt his chest tighten with emotion. Then I'll be there cheering the loudest. They spent evenings practicing together. Sometimes she got frustrated and slammed the keys when she made mistakes. He'd laugh and say, Every wrong note is just a step closer to the right one. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. The stage was big, the lights bright, and the audience large. She stood backstage, her small hands trembling. Mr. Lawson knelt down beside her. Remember, he said gently, just play from your heart. That's what makes you special. She nodded, took a deep breath, and walked onto the stage. As she sat down and began playing, the world seemed to fade away. The notes flowed like a story, her story. Every key she touched carried pieces of her journey: the orphanage, the broken piano, the laughter, the tears, and the man who kept his promise. When she played the last note, the silence that followed was powerful. And then the applause came, long, loud, and full of warmth. Mr. Lawson stood in the crowd, clapping with tears in his eyes. She had done it. After the event, she ran to him. "Did I do okay?" she asked breathlessly. He lifted her in his arms and said, "You didn't just do okay. You were perfect," she laughed, hugging him tightly. "Then you'll always come to hear me play, right?" He nodded. "Always. No matter where you go or how big the stage gets, I'll be there." That night back home, she played one last song before bed, soft and gentle. He sat nearby, listening quietly. When she finished, she turned to him and said, "Thank you for keeping your promise." He smiled, eyes glistening. "Thank you for making me one, the promise. To never stop playing." The house was quiet again, except for the sound of the piano, the same instrument that had once connected two lonely hearts and turned them into a family. The sun was just setting when the orphanage buzzed with excitement. The long-awaited charity event had finally arrived, and everyone was running around, fixing decorations, arranging chairs, and making sure the hall looked perfect. It wasn't just any evening. It was the night when donors, business people, and guests from around the city would come to see what the orphanage had been doing for the children. Inside a small room at the back, the girl sat quietly in front of a mirror, wearing a simple white dress the caretaker had ironed for her earlier that day. Her hair had been tied neatly with a ribbon, and her small fingers fidgeted nervously in her lap. The old piano waited on the stage outside. It had been cleaned and tuned as much as possible, though it still carried the same slightly broken charm that made it sound like no other instrument. She could hear the voices of the other children laughing and talking, but she stayed still, lost in her thoughts. It had been months since the day the man had visited for the first time and made that strange promise. "If she plays the piano, I'll adopt her." He had become a regular face at the orphanage since then. He came not as a rich visitor, but as someone who genuinely cared. He had listened to her play in the evenings, brought her music books, and even had a small piano delivered to the orphanage so she could practice better. At first, she couldn't believe someone like him would bother. But he had a way of speaking to her that made her feel seen, like she mattered. Now she was about to perform in front of a large audience, and he would be sitting in the front row. The thought both scared and thrilled her. She wanted to make him proud, not because he was rich or important, but because he was the only person who had ever believed in her without asking for anything in return. The caretaker came in and smiled warmly. "You're ready, sweetheart?" she asked softly. The girl nodded, clutching her small hands together. "You'll do great," the caretaker whispered, brushing her shoulder gently.
"Just play like you always do, with your heart." As the event began, the hall filled with people in elegant clothes, chatting and smiling, holding glasses of juice and soft laughter.
The host walked up to the microphone, welcoming everyone and thanking them for their support. Then, after a few introductions, he announced that one of the children had prepared something special. The girl took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. For a moment, the bright lights blinded her, and she could feel the weight of 100 eyes watching her. The murmur in the crowd softened as they saw the small girl in white walk up to the piano. In the front row, she spotted him, the man who had changed her life. He gave her an encouraging smile, the kind that reached his eyes. It made her heart steady. She sat down on the small stool, placed her fingers over the keys, and closed her eyes. At first, the hall was silent. Then the music began. The first few notes were soft and slow, almost like a whisper. Her fingers moved carefully, finding their rhythm. Each sound filled the air like a memory coming to life. She played not from sheets or lessons, but from feelings. Every emotion she had buried deep inside her heart poured out through those keys. The guests who had been chatting moments ago fell completely quiet. The sound of the piano, though old and imperfect, carried a kind of beauty that no one had expected. Her music told a story of loss, of courage, and of hope. The man in the front row leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving her. He had seen her practice quietly in the corner of that dusty room months ago. But this was different. Tonight she wasn't just playing notes, she was opening her soul. He remembered the first time he saw her. She had been so small, so unsure, tracing her fingers over the keys of that broken piano. He had thought his words were a joke, a kind-hearted remark to make the children smile. But watching her now, he realized that those words had become something real, something powerful. The melody grew stronger. Her hands moved faster but never out of control. The music rose and fell like waves. Some people in the audience closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. A few wiped away tears without even knowing why. Halfway through, she suddenly hesitated for a split second. A string of fear ran through her. What if she made a mistake? What if everyone thought she was just a foolish girl from an orphanage trying too hard? But then she looked up again and saw him, his calm, steady gaze that told her, "You're doing fine. Keep going." That was all she needed. She took a deep breath and continued. Her hands danced across the keys again, faster this time, full of life. When the last note faded, the silence in the room lasted longer than she expected. For a second, she thought she had failed. But then the clapping began, soft at first, then louder and louder, filling the hall with thunderous applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some even whistled. She blinked, confused by the sudden noise. Then she saw him rise from his seat, his hands coming together slowly, his expression proud and emotional. Tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't bow or smile. She simply sat there, staring at him, feeling something warm in her chest that she couldn't describe. He walked up to the stage. The crowd parted quietly, watching him with curiosity. He climbed the steps, walked straight to her, and without a word knelt beside her. Then he wrapped his arms around her small shoulders. "You did it," he whispered softly. "You really did it." The audience looked on, touched by the moment. The girl pressed her face against his shoulder and whispered back, "Did I make you proud?" He smiled through teary eyes. "You've made me the proudest man in this room." When they walked off the stage together, the crowd still clapped, but their world felt quiet and still. For her, it was as if everything she had ever wished for finally made sense. After the event, people came forward to congratulate her. Some asked the man about her story, and others offered to sponsor her education. He politely thanked them all, but his eyes stayed on her, watching her excitement as she held the small bouquet someone had handed her. Later that night, as they stood near the car waiting to leave, she turned to him and said softly, "I was so scared before I played." He looked down at her. "But you still played," she nodded. "Because you were there," he smiled. "You don't know how many grown-ups would give up if they were that scared." She looked at him, puzzled. "But why?" He paused for a moment. "Because they forget how to believe in themselves." Then gently he added, "You reminded me tonight what real courage looks like." The girl didn't say anything more. She just looked up at the night sky, her eyes catching the stars. She thought of her parents, of the small broken piano they used to play, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone. When they reached the orphanage gate, he turned to her and said, "You know, I think it's time we talked about something important." She tilted her head, unsure what he meant. He smiled, that same warm smile she had come to trust. "I told you once if you played the piano, I'd adopt you." Her eyes widened. The words hung in the air like music that never really fades. "I wasn't joking," he said softly. "I meant it." Her heart skipped a beat. She looked up at him, trying to understand if he was serious. His eyes told her everything. "Would you like that?" he asked quietly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "More than anything." He reached out, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then let's make it happen." She didn't know what to say. She wanted to cry, to laugh, to run, but instead, she just hugged him tightly, holding onto his coat as if she never wanted to let go. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the sound of the piano in her mind, the way the audience had clapped, the way he had hugged her, the way the world had changed with one performance. Somewhere deep inside, she knew her life was about to begin again. The morning after the big event felt strangely quiet. The hall that had been full of laughter, music, and applause was now empty, but in the little girl's heart everything still felt alive. She replayed the sound of the piano, the cheers, and the man's promise. Then let's make it happen. For the next few weeks she lived in a mix of excitement and disbelief. The man came to visit often, sometimes with his assistant, sometimes alone. They filled out forms, spoke with the orphanage director, and met with officials. She didn't understand most of the paperwork, but she understood one thing. He was serious. The other children whispered about it, some teasing, some curious. but deep down, most were happy for her. The caretaker often smiled whenever she saw them together. "You're lucky," she would say softly, "but you've also earned it." The girl didn't feel lucky. She just felt grateful. She had never asked for much in life. A roof, a meal, and a piano to play were all she needed. But now she was about to have something she had never dared to dream of: a family. One cloudy afternoon, he arrived again, holding a small folder in his hand. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried warmth. "It's official," he said quietly. "You're coming home." For a moment, she didn't react. It was as if her mind couldn't believe the words. Then her eyes filled with tears and she ran to him, holding on to him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered over and over, her voice trembling. He smiled, patting her back gently. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You just have to keep being who you are." That evening, as they left the orphanage, the caretaker hugged her one last time. "Remember," she said softly, "music brought you this far. Never stop playing." The car ride to her new home was silent at first. She looked out the window, watching the streets pass by, places she had walked before but never really noticed. She felt both excited and nervous. What if she didn't fit in? What if he changed his mind? But when the car stopped in front of a large house surrounded by trees, her breath caught. It wasn't the size that amazed her, it was the warmth. The garden had flowers in full bloom, and through the window she could see a small grand piano in the living room, shining under the soft light. He opened the door for her, smiling. "Welcome home." Those words echoed in her mind like music. "Welcome home." She stepped inside slowly. The house smelled of fresh paint and something sweet, maybe baked bread. Every room felt calm, filled with gentle colors and quiet light. "This is your room," he said, opening a door near the staircase. Inside, the walls were painted in soft cream, with a little desk, a bed covered in white sheets, and a shelf with a few storybooks. On the nightstand sat a small photo frame, an empty one, waiting for her first picture in her new home. She walked around, touching everything carefully, afraid she might break something. "Is all this really mine?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Every bit of it." In the days that followed, she slowly got used to the new rhythm of her life. She woke up early, had breakfast with him, simple things like toast and fruit, and then went to school. At first she was shy, keeping to herself, but music helped her again. When her teacher discovered she could play, they asked her to perform during morning assembly. The whole class clapped when she played a short tune. It was the first time she felt like she belonged somewhere outside the orphanage. At home, she practiced on the grand piano every evening. The man often sat nearby, listening quietly. Sometimes he would bring his work to the living room, pretending to read papers while secretly watching her play. One evening, as the soft melody filled the room, he said, "You know, you play differently than anyone I've ever heard." She looked up, smiling faintly. "Is that good?" He nodded. "It's honest. You don't just play notes, you tell stories." She thought about that for a moment. Maybe it was true. Maybe music was her way of speaking, of saying things she couldn't find words for. Months passed. The house no longer felt strange. She began to fill the empty spaces with laughter, music, and warmth. She hung pictures on the wall, one of her and him at the piano, another from her school concert. The once empty photo frame on her nightstand now held a picture of them smiling together. One day he surprised her with news. "There's a youth music competition next month," he said. "I think you should enter." Her eyes widened. "Me? Why not?" he said. "You've got something special." She hesitated. "But what if I fail?" He smiled gently. "Then you try again. The only real failure is giving up." So she practiced, every day for hours. Sometimes her hands ached, sometimes her eyes grew tired, but she never stopped. When the day of the competition arrived, she stood backstage with trembling hands. The memory of the orphanage event came rushing back. The fear, the lights, the crowd. He was sitting in the front row again, just like that night. When she saw him smile, her fear faded. She walked to the piano and began to play. The song she chose wasn't loud or showy. It was simple, a tune she had written herself, inspired by her journey. The notes rose and fell like waves of emotion, soft but full of meaning. When she finished, the audience clapped, and she felt that same familiar warmth again. Later that evening, When they announced her name as one of the winners, she didn't jump or scream. She just turned toward him and smiled, and he nodded proudly. One evening, when she was invited to play,